Okay, you should be ready to go.
Okay, so I need to read the writ of determination before we call the meeting to order.
Correct.
Okay, so I'll be reading the written determination of the chair of the public body pursuant to House Bill 5/02 and Utah Code annotated 52-4-207 4A and B. Whereas I am the presiding officer chair at all meetings of the AHRCC Hotspot Region Coordinating Committee. Whereas Utah Code annotated 52-4-101, the Open and Public Meetings Act governs the conduct of meetings of the AHRCC Hotspot Region Coordinating Committee. Whereas the Open and Public Meeting Act defines anchor location as the physical location from which A, an electronic meeting originates, or B, the participants are connected. 52-4-1031. Whereas House Bill 5/02, signed by Governor Gary R. Herbert on June 25th, 2020, amended the Open and Public Meetings Act with the Open and Public Meetings Act amendments. Whereas the Open and Public Meetings Act amendments provide that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body, A, makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. B, states in the written determination described in subsection 4A the facts upon which the determination is based. Whereas the state of Utah remains under a state of public health emergency related to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and significant continued person-to-person transmission of the SARS-CoV-2 virus continues to occur in the state of Utah. Whereas in renewing his order declaring a state of emergency in Utah, Governor Gary R. Herbert said, though case counts are on the decline, no vaccine exists, and the disease is not contained, people in Utah are still getting sick and requiring hospital care, and heightened caution is still necessary. Whereas the city of Moab is currently at a yellow level of restriction, and under this level of restriction, gatherings of more than 50 people are not allowed. Whereas the AHRCC Hotspot Region Coordinating Committee meetings do require attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. For example, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, states that people in their 50s are at higher risk for severe illness than people in their 40s. Similarly, people in their 60s or 70s are in general at higher risk for severe illness than people in their 50s. Whereas the CDC indicates that the best way to protect against and to help reduce the spread of the virus that causes COVID-19 is to limit interactions with other people as much as possible. Whereas the CDC indicates that the lower risk for events and gatherings is virtual only. Whereas the health and safety of committee members, city officials, and employees, staff, and members of the public is best served by holding electronic meetings of the committee. Okay, hold on, I gotta get to a new page. Whereas in renewing his order declaring a state of emergency in Utah, Governor Gary R. Herbert said, though case counts, we already read that one, didn't we? Hold on a second. Let's see, whereas the committee has prepared for and demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct its public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the committee's meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I determine that conducting AHRCC Hotspot Region Coordinating Committee meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire 30 days after the day upon which I made the determination. It is possible that circumstances could warrant future determinations, and so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. Signed, Curtis Wells, Chair, September 3rd, 2020. Is that sufficient?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll call this meeting to order at 10:11. a.m., September 22nd, 2020. Do we have any citizens to be heard?
I have not seen any citizens to be heard forms.
Yeah, nothing from the forum.
Okay, on to item 4, discussion and approval of dispersed parking projects, including off Main Street parking concept and Emma Boulevard parking project. There is a PDF link on the agenda, which is council presentation downtown hot spot parking. Who's presenting this item?
So Chuck,
Do we need a presenter?
Is this for, I think Chuck is available for this.
I'm here. I can do that if you'd like. I can.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Okay. I'll show you what I've done new since the last meeting, okay? I'll try and keep it brief.
Floor is yours, Chuck.
Thank you. Share screen. Just a second, pulling up my folder here. Can you see that now? It says downtown parking project overview.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so the committee last time asked that we go back and add a couple of streets to the project, and we did so, which was 200 north west of Main Street and 100 north west of, east of 100 east. And we've done so, and those are just, this is the overview sheet, so that's where those are. And I'd like to quickly go to the detail sheet to show you that. This installed was able to get, we had to realign some curb and gutter and install the double parking, median parking on 200 north. Now, using the same parameters which we had used on the other streets, ended up with 12-foot travel lanes and some parallel parking on the north side. Maintained the turning bays. And then on 100 north, because it was the same geometric cross-section as what we had done just east of Main Street, the same parameters applied, which we were able to get single median parking with some parallel parking with some on the north side available, because this is only 62 feet curb to curb. And what that resulted in was a total of, if you can see this now, I'm showing you the parking tabulation, which is in the packet. We added in, we came to 144 total parking spaces, was the increase. So not the increase, but that's the total amount. So by adding those two streets in, we make changes to essentially 9 streets. I finally just started calling them street segments because it's so difficult to keep talking about west with numbers. So we end up with a total of 144 on this downtown parking under those parameters. And if we go back to using the 100 South reconstruction plans, which are already completed, it's a total of 135 down here. That's could be determined if this moves forward in final design, like a lot of the parameters can be refined during final design. I've also done a cost estimate for this. Would you like to see that, Curtis? I'll put up.
Yeah, I can't see it, but I'm listening.
Okay. This is a cost estimate, that we did based upon our database of costs, and things, the highest ticket items on here are the concrete, the lighting, which I've considered as part of the project cost, and then I put in, per discussions with UDOT, I had put in, the paving was also some cost. Underneath all that, 6% for aesthetic treatments to be determined, which is a total of $300,000. I put in a 25% contingency because I went back to the work that was done previously when this all began back in 17, and I think part of the problem that occurred was there were not contingency costs built in, and so the expectations when designs got around 2 years later was that things were costing too much, is because no one put in contingencies because these things happen in the future. So I put in a 25% contingency, which is, I believe, reasonable for this type of a project. Someone could argue it should be 20%, others would argue it should be 30%. Sorry about that. So the total is $6,775,000 for that, and that includes all of the streets downtown. And then when I looked at the agenda yesterday and I realized that Emma Boulevard was on here, we went back to the results of the public city council workshop that was held in March, just before the shutdown occurred. And the mayor and I discussed it and make sure that her and I remembered it the same way, and I believe we did. And so I updated the drawing yesterday. And I don't know if if Carly sent that out to you or not, but this is what we're talking about. So this is where the new Hawk signal is going to go in on the widening project. It's already installed. If you've been out there, it's not operational, but it's installed. This is one of the Baptist churches. This is city-owned right-of-way, which was called Emma Boulevard. There's a right-of-way exchange that has been completed with this property owner here that would allow for the shared use path to continue, and that'll be constructed this fall as part of the project. We've contracted for that to happen. And then the idea is that this is known as Emma Boulevard, would be closed off, so there would not be access on and off of Muvita. This green color delineates areas that are to be determined to be green infrastructure. It could be, that would in particular needs to be at least partially a detention basin. But you know, the mayor and I talked about things like it could be a bike stop too, with shade and a water bottle refill and a place for people to work on their bikes, because there's parking. These are the parking spaces here. Then again, green infrastructure in the here between the Church Path and Emma Boulevard. This is a one-way street, so traffic would come in to go into this parking lot and out, but then they have to turn right and go one way down and exit. And this was the thing that was changed as a result of the public input, and the other council members were there, but the mayor and I both think that this would reach general consensus that this was okay with the citizens there, what we both remembered. And this would turn Maxine into a one-way street. Right now, Maxine is a two-way street, but make it eastbound one way with parallel parking here, more opportunities for chicanes and such, green infrastructure along here, parallel parking here, maintain a 13-foot one-way travel lane through here, so that people who use Maxine would have to turn right onto Emma, pick up some parking spaces on Emma over here, and this is the Church of Christ driveway here, in which point Emma would go back to a two-way street, so that people coming off of 400 north could go into that church. And I don't show all the signs that would be needed on this, and there'd be more pavement marking in order to make this happen, but I wanted this exhibit to be representative of the overall plan. The parking stall count here is the Emma parking lot, which is, for clarity, this area here is 16 parking spaces. Emma Boulevard on street are these 4 parking spaces. And the Maxine on street parking spaces are 24. So it could pick up a total of 44 parking spaces under this scenario. I have not included this in that cost estimate because I haven't had time to, but I did the previous cost estimate and it's on the order of $500,000, but I haven't done the level. So that's all the new information that I have. I wanted to present to the committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Hey, Chuck, how do you guys, I'm just looking at that lighting line. How do you guys determine how much light goes in there?
Yeah, so what we did for this project is we had a lighting consultant do a lighting analysis on the widening project for us to see if the city wanted to add lighting. And that council decided not to at the time because it was pretty expensive. But that lighting consultant made a recommendation that pedestrian lights should be 12 feet tall and are about 25 to 35 feet on center. Now, of course, it depends what types of light we're talking about, but these are not the high 40-foot tall freeway lights we're talking about. We're talking about more like the pedestrian lights you see downtown, except not all of them at this point are dark sky friendly, but of course these would be. But that's what we used as our guidance for number of lighting. A detailed lighting study should be done in final design. I think that this may be more lights than is needed, but again, back to the earlier estimates from 2017, I didn't want to underestimate things and then people get surprised later. But Wes, the reason for the lights is just because the nighttime users crossing those lanes of traffic. And if I may, I think I can pull this up on screen. Can you see this Lancaster now? Did that show up?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things about what we've done is very similar to Lancaster, and I just wanted to point out, Lancaster used pavers in here. I think you can see the difference in texture. We're suggesting stamped dyed concrete because pavers in our freeze-thaw environment, Lancaster's at 2,500 feet elevation. They get 1 inch of snow a year. We average 9, but we have much colder temperatures, and that'll just tear those pavers up. So the stamped dyed concrete has twice the life cycle of asphalt too. But you see, these are light poles.
Hey, Chuck,
Yeah.
the Lancaster plan actually isn't, we're just seeing the 100 North Street.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try this again.
No, that was my bad.
Can you see it now, Karen?
Yep,
Right.
yep.
Okay, thanks for letting me know, sorry. Yeah, so this is Lancaster, California. This is their double median parking. These are the pavers that they use there because again, it's low elevation, about 2,400 feet, farm agricultural community for the most part, 1 inch of snow a year. Their low temperatures average about 30 for 1 month. Our low temperatures get down into the 20s for a couple of months. That's why we're recommending stamped dyed concrete. One, because I think it gives it stands out, but it's a long wearing surface. Could be asphalt, but the concrete has twice the life cycle of asphalt, which would lower maintenance costs ultimately. But I also wanted to point out they have lights, see, throughout, plus street curbside lights, plus median lights. So the model that I'm recommending is consistent with this, and I believe it's a safety issue for them the same way it was a safety issue for me in my design consideration. And sorry, that was a long answer to your question, but I wanted to maybe share a little more info on that.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so Chuck, I got a question again about the the stamped concrete. It's expensive and it'd be nice to free up a little bit of money somewhere else if we really didn't need it. In part, I take it the stamped concrete idea that you're throwing out is a way of substituting better quality material that UDOT would pay for since it's part of the construction costs and lessen the burden on the city from a maintenance point of view, which would be something we would have to assume. Is that part of the rationale?
It's exactly part of the rationale, and we actually compared it to paver costs, and pavers are about 3/4 to 100% of the cost of the concrete. So if we did anything except just asphalt, the costs are about the same, is what I'm saying to you, Mike. And the idea is that that concrete should last 40 years versus asphalt, which we typically say is a 20-year life cycle before it needs to be repaved over. So yes, that's at least part of it, is that lower the maintenance costs because of the long-term life cycle of the concrete. Plus, I thought the stamped and dyed gave it some aesthetics appeal, but again, others are better qualified to judge that than me.
Yeah, somebody, Karen, I think you had a question. Go ahead.
Well, I did. So 25% of the budget is for lighting, it looks like. And then, so we'll hopefully figure out if that is determined that that's what's needed. And then, does asphalt by any chance come in colors? I mean, is it possible to do?
No, asphalt gets painted is what you do with asphalt, which is, it's like our striping in town. You can't get different colors of asphalt. No, it's the oil is what makes it black.
And then if we were to go that route of, painting the roads, is there a product? I mean, as we can see, I mean, like the product that we're using does not withstand. I mean, it has to be painted almost every year.
That's correct.
So
yeah, the maintenance is higher.
Okay.
That's one of the things why we did on the design on the concrete. If I can real quick, I'll show you. See how we've delineated the parking stalls with a different type of stamping right here, instead of striping, which we'd normally paint. If this were just asphalt.
Yep.
And that's what they did in Lancaster with the pavers. They used a different paving pattern to delineate the stalls. So this has, this is stamped in this direction, and then this is, and of course, the stamping. This was just a way to show everyone. I'm not suggesting that's what the stamping looks like, right? That was just a graphical hatching pattern to show everybody what I was thinking here.
So Chuck, I got one more question for you, if I may. I'm looking at the, again, I suppose I have an ulterior motive of trying to save a little money now to be used for another purpose. But a positive aspect might be that if we just painted the asphalt to begin with, and I hear you what you're saying, it's more maintenance later on, but it also gives us the freedom to, we can stripe it one way on year one and try it for a year or two. And then when it comes time to repaint it, because we have to repaint it anyway, it gives us the freedom to change the design, different buffer width strips or, whatever it is we find that might be handy to do. Whereas if we went with concrete right from the get-go, then we're kind of confined and stuck with that for a long time. Is there any merit to that?
Well, we talked about that internally, advantages. And the truth of the matter is, let's say that if you ever wanted to take it away, the median parking, concrete is a drivable surface. It'd be a low-speed drivable surface, but you could still drive over the concrete, and you could stripe over the concrete, if the concrete were there. If you're trying to save money and make it asphalt, sure, you can do it. The reason I didn't show it is I didn't think that was in the spirit of the Lancaster model, which is what I thought the committee wanted me to do. But it's certainly doable to do that in asphalt and paint, but it will certainly raise the maintenance cost.
Okay, I hear that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Chuck, I'm just curious, the annual budget, I don't even know that we're painting annually, but I guess it would be important to know how much that actually costs, because we're looking at adding all those, added streets to paint. It seems that it would be fairly expensive.
It would be on the order of $50,000 to $75,000 annually to paint those streets. And we try and budget in the good years $35,000 to $50,000, and that's why we don't get all of our streets done. We just try and prioritize where we need the paint. But to do all these, additional parking would be on the order of 50,000.
And then on 100 East, you know, where the redo next to the park and the school, how long ago was that painted?
Next to
You know, like it's right where we added the plastic bollards sort of, and there's the bike lane.
100 West.
Yes, I'm sorry, 100 West.
Yeah,
Apologies.
that's okay. I was trying to visualize. Your question is, when did we stripe that?
Yeah, was that painted?
That was right about a year and a half ago, I think.
And that is, I mean, already needs to be repainted. So yeah, okay, that's good to note. Thank you.
So Chuck, let me interject one more question about the bollards and so forth. I mean, frankly, I like the freedom that not having bollards is in there because it would allow double length vehicles to use 2 spaces if they need to. And I heard your argument about snow plows and all that kind of good stuff. And I guess I would point out that that's a good argument, but the light posts are another impediment to snow plowing. And the argument's been made that we're likely to have snow in the winter time when the traffic loading would be much lighter and so forth. So, and I grant you that probably bollards are necessary in some places for safety reasons or to encourage people to turn in the right direction. Is there any chance that you can give me some additional design freedom and lower the cost again by pulling some of those bollards? Does that make any sense?
You know, the bollards were there to delineate parking as well as to prevent the left turn out, because we're creating where that median parking, every one of those roads becomes a one-way street on either side of the parking. So the bollards were there partially to help people know where the front of their vehicle is, so people don't cheat to the front. Even though, you know, someone mentioned the other day, oh well, a long vehicle could go in on one side and a short vehicle on the other side. That's true, and we could delineate those bollards could be at irregular locations in order to do what you're suggesting, I believe, Mike. But what you can't do is, you can't pull through an RV with a trailer and come out on the other side. I don't think, because you get the turn, because they're one-way streets. And they don't have to be bollards, they could be planters. I just couldn't in good conscience make those trees. Every one of those locations to be trees. So bollards are kind of a classic traffic control device, traffic engineering device. If during final design something else came up that was better, that could certainly be there, and you could certainly move some of those. And one of the things the mayor, I was talking to her yesterday, I'll give her credit for this idea, is one of the thoughts that she had was maybe at the first parking space on each one of the streets, we turn that into bike parking, you know, and make that parking stall a bike parking stall, a meaningful one, however we would need to do that. Because we don't have a lot of bike parking. You know, the parking structure was going to have, we had bike parking designated in an area for that. So maybe we take like one stall per street and put a bike parking and this median parking as a place to go. And we could, so I think there's room to do some things creatively, like say, we don't need uniform bollards every one of those on every street. We want to make 2 extra long spaces and 2 extra short spaces, or whatever the number is. I'm just throwing that out there as an example. So I think there's design flexibility as when it goes to final design. You know, concept designs, I try to identify the opportunities, the constraints, come up with something that I thought the committee wanted, and as close as I could get. I know it's not probably 100%, but there you have it.
Yeah, I hear all that. That sounds great. Thank you.
Hey, Chuck, this is Curtis. I've got a question for you. Just remind me again. So prior to adding these additional 2 blocks, what was our net parking stall count at that point before we added these 2 extra blocks?
I'm going to look at it real quick and give you the exact number as opposed to me going just from memory. This was West 200 North. We added 19. Second block. We added 35 spaces, Curtis. So we were down at 100.
Okay. Okay. And
So, yeah.
and so the total number, the net number is 144, you said, for the whole project?
With the addition of those two streets, yes. And then if Emma Boulevard were there, that's another 44 spaces on top of the 144. Would be end up with a total of 188 parking spaces.
That's awesome. Okay.
So,
So I was looking at we were talking about the stamped concrete. The city actually has that slick rock looking dyed stamped concrete on the sidewalk, you know, kind of out in front of City Hall on some spots, or out in front of the Center Street gym. I think that's good looking stuff. I mean, if that's what we were, if that's what we ended up doing, you know, that there would be some continuity with what the city's already done in some areas downtown.
If
Yeah,
I
so
could,
now-
if I could just interject, I think that there are lots of options for the urban design details, whether it be trees in pots or, you know, shrubs in pots that can be removed, or various concrete patterns. There are lots of options, bollard design, and I would hope that some of those final decisions get made through the more detailed, you know, final design drawings. I mean, you know, my knowledge is what I have, Chuck's is what he has, but there, you know, we certainly don't have an exhaustive experience in different methods of these, you know, how you can do um, complete streets, but there are lots of different ways you can achieve it. So I'm just hoping that we don't get too mired in, you know, the little details at this point, and hope that some of those can be ironed out once I mean, it's great to get some cost estimates, all that, but I think some of the details probably will iron out during the final design stage. That's my 2 cents worth.
So I just want to add that along those lines, that it seems like this stall count and the cost estimates will probably adequately cover our needs. But per the city council meeting that we had last week, as well as the public input, I feel like the landscaping is not optional. I feel like this has been omitted. It is a more essential element of the Lancaster model, as we were referring to it, than the stamped colored concrete. And I think there's room in the budget and in the design for it, but I'm worried about the perception as we continue forward, both with our potential funder as well as the public and our councils. And so I would like to at least see a sketch of another possible schematic of a typical street that includes in-grade planters and trees.
So I would completely agree with that, especially when we're going to try to go public within the next week or so, beginning of October.
You want a sketch for each street, or just is one kind of a model one fine? Like
Just a model, like there's another model street that has elements identified. And so this would be similar, just so that the public sees visually the range of options that we're discussing developing in final design.
Yeah, I definitely agree that landscaping, I think, is an important element. I mean, the decision makers and the people holding the purse strings obviously have to make that final determination, but I think it's important.
Do you want a range of options, or like just one for 2 things?
I think one would be adequate, but just but visually showing that what I think is a really important element is under consideration. And it could include other things like bulb outs at non-Main Street intersections and bike parking there. I think I mean, the idea about using a parking stall for bike parking is interesting, although it reduces the vehicular stall count, which is, I think, is what UDOT is maybe most concerned with. And one of the things about riding a bike downtown is that it does give you the freedom to park close to your destination. Whereas as vehicle parking becomes more constrained, that can help incentivize people to take bikes. And so having smaller bike racks, but more dispersed, can help lead to the transportation choices that we want to encourage people to take. So finding ways to disperse the bike racks around, I think, may ultimately make more sense than vehicle stall sublimation.
Yeah, I would like to second that notion about more a brief model than because would be great by my count too, because it was very popular in the survey. Lisa can vouch for that, I'm sure, because remember the people who filled out the survey saw this Lancaster model with lots of trees out there. We don't have to have lots of trees, but boy, some of them out there, someplace at judicious places would be a great thing.
Well, I want to ask Chuck if that's
So
something,
it sounds like,
because we do use the Lancaster as like a model when we're talking about it in terms of public engagement. We're like, it'll look something like this generally. So I think we can have something, Chuck, is that something that you guys can illustrate for one of the streets?
I said it before, I'll say it again, and it may not be what everyone wants to hear, but if you look on those drawings that I sent, those streets have, for the last 115 years, been filled with utilities. And there are utilities down there. There's sanitary sewer in every one of those streets. There's culinary water in every one of those streets. There's probably gas in every one of those streets. There's probably irrigation lines in every one of those streets. There's storm drains in most of the streets. So if we plant trees that have any type of deep-seated roots, I think the city's asking for trouble. That's why
What about the planter option?
What about a subgrade planter with an engineered soil so that the trees actually thrive, unlike the existing planters that we see in parking lots and streetscapes all over town where the trees are suffering? What about mapping the utilities so that we can put these trees, so they're not so much in conflict? But I want trees. I don't want excuses.
Yeah, well, then maybe we should, I think a good idea would be to, what I've said all along is hire landscape architects or people who do this. I've said this from today. I said,
and I'm saying that we'll do that at final design. And I just want to show the public that we're not excluding that option. And maybe in final design, we'll end up agreeing with you once we get into those details. All I'm asking for is an example. It doesn't even have to be a particular street.
And so is the Lancaster, when we show something like Lancaster, that's not, because I was thinking that we could just use those so people could see actual streets. You want it more for Moab, but not a particular street?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that we don't want to present something like Lancaster if that's not anywhere near what we're going to get, because I mean, I don't want to set expectations so high and then it's just a disappointment when the actual project comes through.
Yeah.
Just showing a planter with a thriving tree seems like a very viable option.
Okay, we can maybe try the planter, a planter drawing. Is that something, Chuck, that you can do in-house, or?
We can do what we can do, but I'm not sure it's going to be to the satisfaction of everyone. If not, there's certainly people out there who can do that type of thing. Right? There are consultants who we have on-call consultants we can do. We can take a stab at it, but if it's not sufficient, then it's not sufficient.
I mean, Chuck, I don't feel like this falls in your lap. When we have a planning department, and I mean, this is where you would imagine that direction would come from. I don't see it coming from the engineering department.
I'm trying to figure out who on my staff can do it, if that's possible. So if not Chuck, maybe, or Nora, is this something planners can do? The planning department, what about, and if not ours, maybe the county planning?
I don't think either the county or the city has somebody with that kind of graphic skills. But on the other hand, we could search examples and try to find one that has more planters perhaps. But we'd be willing to do that for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got all kinds of complete streets information and we could try to dig one up that maybe more accurately represents what we're talking about. I'd be willing to put some time and energy into that.
Great. And like, you think it could be turned around in the next week or so?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we could, I mean, I could do it on Friday, whatever.
I'm just curious. So like the trees that we have in front of the city in the library, and those are in the center, like, how are those, I mean, how are those different than what we're trying to do? Chuck, do you know? Can you?
We could take pictures and drawings of what's in front of the city hall. Is that what you mean, Karen?
Yep. And I'm just like, I'm curious, is there something different that's happening there that makes it acceptable?
Well, see, I don't know where the sewer in the water is in front of City Hall. I've never looked, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying you can't do trees. I said we have to be cautious about it. And I wasn't making excuses. I was trying to share information on my design assumptions and decisions. So planters are certainly doable. And maybe what Kaylin suggested about planters deep are doable, but it would take something in design. But we can certainly work with Nora to come up with some kind of a graphic, and see if that works for you this week.
Yeah.
Next week, by next week.
For a public meeting and for the.
So it sounds like to me that we're going to hold off on approval in today's meeting and take some time to finish the sketches and kind of finish polishing this project off. And it sounds like the city's got some discussions to have.
So
what on that deliverable. I mean, so
Sorry. No, I'm trying to balance like making to move forward and doing public engagement. So if you want public engagement on this, like, we're gonna have to make a decision. This is something you want, and this is what you want. It doesn't mean you have to select this project ultimately at the end, of course.
But I think what I'm hearing from Kaylin and Karen and Mike is that they don't want to roll out what we have today for public engagement because it's not in alignment with what they feel like their constituents are expecting.
Right.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
It seems like.
Curtis, we're going to develop that over the next week for public engagement. I don't know if you heard that, but
okay.
Come to the committee again before it goes out.
Okay, so do you want to sorry, I think there's a lag. I'm having a hard time getting in sync here. So let me ask you a question. Do we need to take any kind of action on this today for your time frame and your process?
Yes. I would request that if you want this as part of public engagement, that you say you want this as part of public engagement. This is your last chance to say what goes in the pot for that. So I would say, if you're saying we want public engagement on this project, but we want it with the landscape kind of features, that's a great recommendation, and we can move forward with that. Does that sound good? Or do you want to wait?
So I will entertain a motion from a city council member to move this forward how they want it, how you guys want it.
Prior to that, Curtis, this is Monty, and I apologize. I was waiting for a good time to jump in. The discussion as it's progressed today, I just want to point out a couple of things that are very concerning to me. When we started the process of looking at the dispersed on-street parking, one of the caveats that we put on there is that we ought to try to keep the cost of the parking per stall at a level that is reasonably close to that of the parking structure. I did some quick math, and on the parking structure, we were looking at, let's see, it was 8.3 million when we were looking at about 200 and originally 320 stalls, and that came down to about 240 or 220 stalls, which is respectively about $35,000 to $38,000 per stall. Now, with what we have in front of us today, with the original 144 stalls at 6.775 million, that's $47,000 per stall. So it's an increase of over $10,000 per stall. If we do the Emma Boulevard parking and pull that in, that gives us a total of 188 stalls at 7.275 million based on the estimate, and that's about 38.7 per stall. So it's any way we slice it, we're looking at a pretty decent increase over the amount per stall that we looked at previously. So I just wanted to make sure we point those out, because as we go into these conversations of stamped concrete versus asphalt and paint and other things, that those are all items that add to that cost. And I don't like being the one to rain on the parade, but we definitely need to keep these things in mind, because those were some caveats that were put in place at the very beginning. The 6% aesthetics is something that was consistent with what we did on the parking structure. And the reason we did that on the parking structure, and the reason we executed the agreement with the city, is we as UDOT did not want to be in the position of trying to decide what aesthetic or architectural features that the parking structure would have. That we just wanted to execute that agreement up front with a known budget or a known percentage for aesthetics, so that we didn't have challenges in the end. And I think, you know, we took that approach here as well. But, you know, things like stamped and colored concrete, that certainly would fall into the aesthetics category. And even though they're included in the main estimate as normal work. So anyway, there's some serious concerns about cost. I like I said, I hate to be the one to rain on a parade, but it strikes me that we're looking at almost $10,000 per stall greater than what we were previously.
So, Monty, I appreciate that, and I think that's a good reminder for us. One of the here's my thoughts on this, because I know the city council feels strongly, you know, that the aesthetics and the appeal is you know, one of the higher values of their constituents. But to me, you know, a path forward that I think, you know, makes sense is if we can. I don't see any problem and you know, for purposes of public engagement, to show sketches and visuals of what ultimately, you know, this can look like. But it may be unrealistic to say that it's going to look like this on day one on UDOT's dime. And so, you know, if there was a way to design this so that the cost per stall is down with UDOT's investment, and then, you know, moving forward, if the city and the county can budget for aesthetics and trees and things like that, you know, to enhance the appeal, then that in a way that doesn't harm our ability to get the funding from UDOT, I'd really like to see us, you know, be a little bit, take our blinders off and be a little bit more flexible, because I think we have to. And if we can design this in a way that doesn't inhibit our ability to spruce it up, plant trees, you know, and make it more appealing and pleasing aesthetically in the future, that would be great. You know, so I don't think we necessarily need to have our cake and eat it too. Just try to determine, you know, how nice can we make it up front in this first round with UDOT's money that's sufficient enough and satisfies both parties. and then in the future find a way to budget for the aesthetics using our local dollars. You know, that seems like the best compromise here, because we can't continue to push. I totally understand what the citizens' expectations are, but we can't continue to push UDOT to the extent where it makes the project not feasible when it doesn't stand up. So we need to find where that balance point is, and vice versa. You know, if Monty, if UDOT can, you know, can find that balance, you know, point on our end where we need to have some percentage in aesthetics, which we have that 6% figure to work with. But we've got to find some common ground here, and we need to do it soon. And I don't see, I'm interested to hear some feedback in doing this in phases. Kaylin or Mike and Karen would comment on that. We all need to be on the same page. And it seems like we've got a little bit of a gap that we need to bridge here.
So I mean, Monty, I don't know if you would be able to answer this, but so, you know, in the project, you know, the AHRCC's hotspot funding or any of the hotspot funding that was allocated, economic development is a big portion of the funding as well. Is that correct? I mean, like there was 3 large subcategories. It was, you know, relieve congestion, economic development, and access to recreation. And is that correct? Or, and I guess my question would be, are they weighted the same, or is the main goal just congestion relief?
I'm going to answer that if you don't mind, Monty. It's in the criteria, the program criteria, and the priority has always been mitigating congestion. That has always been the priority since day one.
And I'd also just add, since
tourism impacted infrastructure.
Since UDOT
that's always been
is taking a pause, is that we're not necessarily using the same scoring process that we did in round 1. It seems like we're kind of scoring it against the deliverables of the parking structure, for better or worse. But maybe to try to pivot a little bit, it seems like maybe at the city we have some work to do. And I'm wondering if we should just have a subcommittee of a couple city council members and staff to kind of go over this in more depth. I feel like it seems like if other aesthetics would take care of it and stamped concrete became asphalt, that might be the single, other than the lighting, that might be the single easiest way to get our per stall cost down. Unfortunately, but I don't know that I really want to make that decision, do this value engineering by committee right now. I don't know that that's a good idea, but maybe we could turn this around for this committee pretty quickly in the subcommittee.
If I may interject, Mr. Chair, where I see us headed here, to make Monty happy and to try to make the citizens happy, as well as to ditch the expensive concrete and just go with asphalt right now. I thought I heard Chuck say earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chuck, the pavers didn't really, from a cost point of view and maintenance didn't make a lot of difference. So anyway, build it without the concrete, without the pavers, do it with asphalt. Painting, we know it's going to have to be maintained more, and that'll be a burden on the city. Reduce the number of lighting posts to a minimum, just for safety reasons. Again, anything over that would be an amenity that the city would have to foot on their own dime later on. Do the Emma Lane stuff, because as Monty pointed out a moment ago, apparently the cost per stall comes down when we add the Emma Boulevard thing. We're much closer to where the parking garage was in the beginning, if we include Emma in this cost estimate. So that's kind of where I see us headed at the moment.
Yeah, Chair, can I just make a comment? Chair, can I make a comment?
Yeah,
I'd say go ahead.
Sorry. Monty, I was of the understanding that we were working off the net additional stalls. I remember, and Chuck, please correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we had, with the parking garage, a total of 250 stalls, but we already had 70 stalls in situ. So I thought the net gain was 180. And so I calculated 8.3 million, which I think was the final cost, but I wasn't sure if that included contingency. Came out at $46,000 per stall. And I think Chuck's numbers now are just shy of 7 million, which includes a 25% contingency. Hopefully that could be bettered down as part of the design process for 140 stalls. And I get that at 48.6. So that seems to me to be within 5%. Is that going to be close enough to kind of continue to move forward?
So looking at the numbers, well, I guess it comes down to, and I guess, you know, it's probably not the appropriate time to be mincing into the numbers, but my understanding is there was 60 existing at the parking area downtown. There were 60 existing, and we were hoping to get into the originally 320, and then as design progressed, it was dropping down to I believe to 240. If you took from 3 levels or 4 levels, 80 per level at 320, and then coming down to 3 levels would be 240. We certainly need to be very close. And in fact, I think it was a lot of the arguments that were made in the public meetings against it was the cost per stall. And so, you know, I'd take a look at the numbers, and I think I just want to make sure everybody is well aware of what those costs are, and that we need to be sticking to the intent of the funding, and it is for congestion relief and not for aesthetic enhancements. That's a big part of the challenge.
Yeah, if I could say, Monty, I think one thing that you might want to think about, that I went back to that original hotspot. If I can, real quick. When I went back to the original hotspot, part of the problem, I think, with the parking structure was there was no contingency in any of those projects. And they get built 3 years later, or, you know, we're getting to final design 2.5 years later, and the details become evident and the costs become evident. So the only thing I put in that contingency there, and I just think maybe you got to think about if that's appropriate or not when comparing, because the original one had no contingency. And we could pull out that contingency and there'd be 1.3 million would come out of that 6.7 in a minute. So I just want to make sure that you understand and you know, maybe think about that. You know, I don't know that you need to respond right now, but think about how to handle that issue.
Yeah, definitely, Chuck. Contingency could be included in all contingency level estimates. And so, and that's where I think the 8.3, by the time it got to that, I'm not sure where I think that was being absorbed in the reduction of 320 down to 240. So that's where that contingency happened. And so I am comparing apples to apples when I use that 240 number. Because that's the contingency was the reduction of basically 25% in the capacity of the structure. So if we are comparing apples to apples, I believe, given that.
So Curtis, I have a question. Go ahead, Monty.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, this might be taking us further off track, but as I recall, UDOT a long time ago said that they would not be building roads. And this was in relation to the Emma Boulevard project, the dispersed parking there. So I guess my question is, has that position changed, or has the city found Sorry, I missed
The-
that.
I
Go
presume
ahead.
that
I
was
think you know
Galen.
what I'm asking. Yes.
Question directed to me. And yes, our
Yes.
position has stayed the same, that we would participate with the parking on that portion of the project, but not on the road construction. And so it would need to be a division of those costs between the city and the project for what would be the one-way road portions and the parking portions. And I believe previously a number that sticks in my mind was $336,000, and we were thinking it would be about $330 some odd thousand per party is a number that sticks in my mind from our previous discussions.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. But I'm sorry, my phone dropped just after I guess just after I rained on the parade. My phone dropped, and so I missed several minutes there of the conversation. But what I did catch is I heard Curtis talk about a phased approach and how it is feasible to move forward with a concept of adding parking at a cost that's reasonable or that we can afford and that is in line with previously discussed costs as far as the parking structure. And then add amenities and add enhancements at a future date. That's something that could be in place, that the footprint can be in place, and that there could be additions to that to enhance the look and feel of it in the future over what it currently is at construction. And I think that's reasonable as well. So I just wanted to add that because I lost audio for a few minutes.
Monty, there was just a question about the
So
weight.
a question for I've got a question.
It's not working, Chair.
Hey, let's slow down a little bit because I'm lagging. Let's make sure we get the floor before we take off and jump into it. Let's try to get a little bit of control here. So I have a question for Kaylin and Karen and Mike. If we move forward and we went to public engagement with some sketches of the parking project concept in phases, that peaks out at maybe not phase 1 but phase 2 or 3, the aesthetics kind of gradually increase. Is that something that would be acceptable to you all? How do you all want to move forward? Because we need to go out with public engagement on something. We don't want to be disingenuous and go out with this, keeping and all the trees if it's not feasible to have that, in this first phase of funding through UDOT. Are you comfortable with moving forward in a phased approach? What are your thoughts there? We need to identify kind of a path forward that everyone's comfortable paying for more aesthetics than what we've already identified. It's not going to happen. So we need to make some decisions on how we can move forward and ultimately deliver the landscaping and the aesthetics that the constituents want down the road, it sounds like to me. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not clear to me that the aesthetics are what's driving the cost so much as just like the way the project's been defined. And again, I'm not making a formal motion to table, but because that'll cut off discussion and it's hard to get UDOT here. But I'm sensing that having a subcommittee work with this for a couple of days might be useful.
I wouldn't recommend a subcommittee, maybe just you guys independently
Okay.
to UDOT. Sorry.
I think that giving you and the staff and I am very supportive of giving the city, you know, a brief window of time and space to work through this. You know, the issue of getting something approved for public engagement, and what Carly has said is this is our last chance to take action on that. So what I'm wondering is if we can take action, you know, and the motion includes giving the cities, you know, the time and space to modify the proposal. I'm fine with that.
So, Mr. Curtis, if I may throw in my 2 bits worth. What I described a moment ago is essentially the phasing approach that Monty and yourself have just proposed, and I'm fine with it, actually. It'll be an interesting sales job to residents, all right, because it's not a given. I mean, we know from the results of the survey that the residents typically were not terribly interested in lots more parking, of course, which is what UDOT is interested in. That's the disconnect that Kalen's talking about. And they were interested in amenities. So it'd be our job then to attempt to sell the notion that we're going to give you what you really don't want, which is a lot more parking spots, because that's what UDOT is happy funding, on the condition that in years to come, and soon years to come, whenever if and when the city can find funding for it, to add those amenities and make it look pretty and a nice shady spot, which is what visitors and residents and all of us would really like to see. But we would have to propose it to residents on that caveat, like this is what you get now. With any kind of luck, this is what you're going to get to make it look nicer in the next few years. But there's no guarantee we can make that happen soon, but it's something we will attempt to do and see if they buy it or not. It's not clear to me what they'll do.
Monty, Curtis can't see you. I just go ahead.
Okay. And I'm a little concerned about the messaging on that. With all due respect, Mike, it's not that UDOT is wanting to fund parking. It's UDOT has worked through a process for the second time now, in which parking has risen to the top for a project that the community and that the committee has desired to pursue. And it based on the impact to traffic and the ability to help with congestion in the area, that appears to meet the criteria. And so I'm not real comfortable with saying that, you know, UDOT is willing to fund parking and they're not willing to fund other things. That's just, this is the project that rose to the top. And so I just wanted to make that clarification, because it, you know, we're getting into, you know, the 11th hour of the time frame in which we had allocated to come up with a project. And, you know, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but I just want to make sure that we are all understand that the criteria of the funding is to meet congestion relief for the Arches area. And this is the project that rose to the top. There are other projects that are also being considered that we could discuss, you know, at a better time as directed by our chair. But I just wanted to make that clarification.
So Monty, I think part of what was when the call dropped for you, it was also just asking you the question: does economic development hold weight in determining criteria for the project?
It is part of the concern, yes. It is part of the criteria, yes. And that's a big part of it's the congestion relief and the economic development, I believe, is how we arrived twice now at parking to help with that economic development and congestion relief.
So I think there's a part of, you know, from us, like trying to be able to convince UDOT that actually having potted plants or whatever it is that we decide happens is part of that economic development. Because I mean, we could have side streets that are completely bare and it's people aren't going to be encouraged to go park there and get off of Main Street. But if we had you know, side streets that allowed for biking and pedestrians, and your parking was potentially shaded, it's going to be a really easy sell for people to get out of their cars and want to park on the side streets and meander and get off of Main. So, I mean, I'm basically, I am trying to convince you that there is economic development aspects in having the side streets actually look attractive.
And yes, and we recognize that, and that's the reason for the 6% on the aesthetics, which is higher than we would typically do. It's usually 4% on generally on projects that we allow to go to aesthetics. And so, you know, we recognize that, and we're trying to, you know, make it be a part of a process that allows for some enhancements, some improvements in the aesthetic nature of the project.
Okay, thank you.
So Monty, one question for you.
Go ahead, Wade.
Just so you were saying that stamped concrete falls into the aesthetics pricing. Is that correct?
That's correct. Stamped and dyed would be an improvement or an aesthetic improvement over just normal concrete. That's correct.
Okay.
And another thing, and I wanted to, Matt made a point, and what we're looking at here is the delta in the change, or I should say the change for those in parking, and you're absolutely correct, Matt. The change, the cost for the change was about $46,000. To go from 240 to 180 was $46,000, and so it's in the ballpark. It's still higher. What's proposed in front of us today is higher than the parking structure. And so I think it would be very beneficial to bring that number in below, because if you all recall, in our public meetings, there was a significant emphasis placed on the cost per stall and how it was way over what it should be. And it's very difficult to go back now and say, well, now it's okay. We're really looking to try to be consistent with our funding and to provide the best project available. So I wanted to make sure that I checked that delta, and it is correct. It is $46,000 per stall. So we're not that far off.
So I'm hearing that perhaps the proposal to UDOT may need some work, but in the interest of moving forward with engagement with the public, here's one idea. We have the existing drawings as one concept that this committee considered. And then we have a sample street that shows a different set of, a different design. It doesn't have the stamped concrete. It has outlines of trees and other things. And we say this represents the range of things that we're working on. We can get their feedback. But we can also continue just to work on generating at least one proposal that meets the criteria that UDOT has mandated. And so that would be a way to move forward with public engagement with the existing drawings with a small addition. And then, but acknowledging that we're not approving a proposal as part of a package at this time, because there's more work to be done on multiple fronts, internally and externally.
Yeah, I think that's great, Kaylin. In terms of, I mean, approval of the package or any proposal doesn't have to happen until later in October. So we just need to know what you want us to set to the public, and that's really helpful direction. We can do that.
Yeah, I think this is the project is in the city, and it's the city staff that's worked on this and developed this concept. And so I think ultimately, as chair of the committee, I think direction at this point on this project, it'd be good to hear from the city council. And I appreciate, Kaylin, that the options you presented there.
I'll just go ahead and I mean, I would say I think that's a great idea, Kaylin. I mean, I support trying to, show something that represents what the community is looking for, what we're looking for as a committee, and get it under the cost per stall for UDOT to make this a feasible project.
My impression is we're all saying the same thing in different words. It's still talking phases here one way or another. So I'm fine with where Karen and Kaylin are headed with it. We'll have to decide exactly how to present it, but I think we're on the road.
For the record, I'm not that interested in phases because of our capital improvement project funding constraints and how aesthetic improvements might score against other more pressing projects. So I'm hoping that we can do what we want to do within the budget constraints that we have here.
Totally agree. Chair, is it possible to, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity or a minute for maybe Monty. I was hoping Jeff would be on the call just to, I had a conversation with Jeff Saunders last week about transit, and I just wanted to see if UDOT would address that to the committee.
That's on an agenda item following, and that's why we're trying to get through this agenda item. Question for Carly, do you want a formal action by the committee, or are we good?
I think we're good.
That straw poll by.
This is good direction. No, I think we're all good. No need for action on it. We will use sort of the existing drawings and try to, as Nora mentioned earlier in this meeting, it seems like planning has some options for some drawings and examples that we can use to get some engagement. Thank you so much. We lose Curtis.
All right. Well, thank you for the continued being up.
Wait, and there's one.
Can you not hear me?
No.
Sorry. I have one other question. As part of that, does this committee also want Emma included?
Hello.
I didn't know if we were moving on to the next agenda item because this is part of the same one.
Yeah, I think so. I think we gave it a thumbs up at the last meeting, and I don't think anything's changed.
Okay, great.
A point of clarification though, Carly and Chuck, as Monte touched on once again, the northernmost parking lot, UDOT has always been receptive to paving at their expense, but they've said a number of times, I believe, that they don't do parking lots that don't go somewhere, and they're not going to pave the one-way stretch of road. So that's always been in the city's interest to do so. And the cost estimates, Chuck, that you've prepared or we've had in the past that reflects that. Do I have that much correct?
Well, if the committee wants to move forward on that, I will break out the cost estimate for the one-way road and do a better cost estimate on Maxine and on the parking lot. So when I said to you earlier today, the $500,000, that included the cost of the one-way road in there. That was a total paving because it was last minute that we had that drawing. But if you want, I could break that out in the next couple days and get that. I also, if I can, while we're on this, I can revise the cost estimate for the drawings that I have now to not show stamped dried concrete. I mean, we can show regular concrete, we can show asphalt. That's all manageable to do, and I can get that done. So I'll do those.
Yeah, maybe for the next meeting we have that information as we further refine the proposal, right?
Right.
And then maybe having Emma broken out would also help us sort of pick and choose or just evaluate what we want or how to get those costs down. And of course, we would want to know the ongoing O&M costs too, which would probably fall to the city if it were something like the striping, you know, that $50,000 per street number you were looking at. So.
But what Monty said is concrete would be included, but if it was dyed, then that's an aesthetic. So, I mean, that's something to consider too. Is that correct, Monty? Or if we would pay for potentially, like if it's stamped, then that's an aesthetic, but the concrete itself, where the bulk of the cost is really is that would be an included cost. And that's not aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, essentially the easiest way, the least expensive way to get there would be with asphalts. And so anytime when you add concrete, that certainly is an upgrade. When you add stamped and dyed, that's even more of an upgrade. That's even more towards aesthetics. And so, yeah, we'll just have to work through that. I think it'd be beneficial to know the cost of each, so that the committee can make decisions and we can make a decision on how to present that.
By the way, Chuck, I just want to thank you for your late breaking work here on cost estimates. This is a big help. So I just want you to know I appreciate it. Okay.
Welcome.
And let's get the next meeting is through those, like, I think.
Okay, so we ready to move on to the next item then?
It looks like people are nodding, Curtis. I don't know if you can see us.
Yes.
Okay, next item is this presentation Main Street improvement.
So I assume, Curtis, that you introduced for me to begin, kind of cut out there, but we did some modeling with our Central Traffic Operations Center and a consultant doing modeling. And in a nutshell, you know, the things we looked at was removing parking, adding bike lanes, adding bulb outs and bike lanes with center medians, remove parking, bike lanes, center medians, and restricted lefts, bulb outs by themselves, center medians by themselves, and center medians and restricted turn lanes by themselves. It was the menu of items that we discussed, and the results of those are that there are none of those improvements show a reduction in congestion without removing parking. And so it's the position of UDOT that and the degree of improvement was not significant enough that it's something that we would be pushing to move forward with at this time. As traffic becomes worse into the future, then the benefit of removing parking does increase. But in a nutshell, to not waste a lot of time on this effort, there are none of those improvements that were recommended or suggested by the committee to look at that actually showed a reduction in congestion. And so beyond the aesthetics or enhancements of Main Street, which isn't necessarily the focus of what this funding is intended for, there's none of those that I believe that we as UDOT would be pursuing. And I can, if there are questions about that, I can answer those. But I guess there's one area that did show like a 2-second improvement on pedestrian cross time was bulb outs at the corners. However, as we evaluated the probability of increased turning movements due to all of the side street dispersed parking, those bulb outs become problematic. And so we felt the benefit of that was not significant, and in fact would be outweighed by those restriction on turning movements, those right-hand turning movements, and the ability for those that are making right turns to move over into the lane and start to use the shoulder area to begin their right turn. So I wanted to make sure I clarified that regarding the bulb outs at the corners. Any questions regarding that?
Did you document this at all? I'm wondering if, I'm just curious. I'd be curious to just review it if you did.
Yeah, we have it documented and I can share that out. Share screen.
Or if you have it in a,
Are you able?
yes, you've started screen sharing.
So at the top, you see the no build. Are you able to see that screen now?
Yes.
Yep. You can see our no build is our current condition. If we remove parking, there is a reduction of like 45, 50 seconds overall. And this you have 3 sections here. The section from SR 128 to 100 north is your blue. 100 north to 300 south is your gray, and then this peach color is 300 south to 4th east. And so you can see there are, and if you go all of these options through here include remove parking. And then when you get to the bulb outs, just the bulb outs alone, you have a 6/10 of a minute, or 6/100 actually of a minute there. A reduction in time, which is about 2 seconds. And then here you can see the center medians and the center medians and restricted turn lane, left turns. So it's interesting to see that removing parking and adding bike lanes gave the most benefit in the model. But none of those were significant in the reduction of congestion and the time to travel the length of Main Street.
Monty,
Any other?
well, yeah, just curious, like, it feels like we're getting more congestion downtown in terms of pedestrians and vehicles. And just what about, I'm open to talking about restricting left-hand turn signals. Is that an option? I mean, because it feels like it's just becoming a dangerous situation.
Restricting left turns, as you can see, was actually without removing parking, adding center medians and restricting left turns is the most impactful into creating additional congestion. One of the benefits of removing parking at some point in the future would be that you can increase your pedestrian area on your sidewalks.
But the restricted left-hand turns are in conjunction with center medians. If we didn't have, I'm just curious if we're at a point where, safety-wise, we would look at restricting left-hand turns.
We certainly can evaluate that. That could be done independent of this project.
Okay.
If that's something that the city would like to pursue, we could evaluate doing that. But that wouldn't, it's simply some signage and some a little bit of paint for the most part as far as making those type of changes. And so it's something we can certainly evaluate further, but I don't think we need to be confined by the parameters of this project to do that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So really, there's not much left to discuss on Main Street improvements, right? We're just, sounds like we're just going to move on.
That's our recommendation, because the removal of the parking isn't something that the community is in favor of at this time, and I believe it's something that there's no benefit if we don't do that. There's nothing else that we can really do short of what Karen asked about. We can investigate further, but I would agree with you, Chair.
Okay, so is there any last comments, thoughts, questions about Main Street improvements then from the committee?
The last question, so Monty, if we did remove parking and we were to add some of these elements, we would save, did you say 45 seconds?
The most beneficial, as you can see here, is the third line down, and that is a savings from, or total, the downtown portion is from 1.93 to 1.47. So yeah, about half a minute. That's about 30 seconds.
Okay.
And I realize 30 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but it's cumulative. And so, yeah, it's not a huge savings.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Okay, if there are no further questions or comments on Main Street improvements, we'll move on to item 6, which is discussion regarding updated shared use path concept and public transit concept update. Before we begin, I just want to mention that I don't think we're anticipating a big update on the shared use path. I discussed that briefly with Commissioner Hawks, and of course she's welcome to chime in or add additional comments. But I think we were kind of hoping to focus more on public transit for this item, and that the shared use path would of course come back in a following meeting with a more kind of in-depth update. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, Commissioner Hawks, and if not, we'll turn it over to City Councilwoman Karen Guzman-Newton and UDOT to bring us all up to speed on public transit.
I turn it over to Councilperson Guzman-Newton and Monty, UDOT.
And Monty, I prefer to defer to you. And please.
Okay. Well, basically, I'll just cut to the chase. And bottom line is we've been discussing this from the very beginning within our internal UDOT team and trying to figure out how to work things through. Originally we were trying to conform to some other criteria that we had in other locations in the state with the hotspot funding, but we've made a determination that we could entertain and the possibility of doing a reduced operation timeframe, and that if we could write pull together an RFP to do a trial period of say 3 years to 4 years on a transit or a shuttle system for the community, and if the community had the ability to have a little bit of skin in the game to participate in that we could go forward with an abbreviated trial period. I think that's probably the best way just to introduce this. I reached out to John Nebstead at Fair and Piers, and he has an individual that this came into their firm recently that had some familiarity with operating a shuttle of the type that we have been discussing in this group. And we believe that there is a ballpark estimate in about $1.5 million per year to operate a couple of shuttles. And that information can be certainly, I believe I forwarded that on to you. Did I not, Karen?
No.
No, not that one. Okay. And anyway, we also have that information and information from Springdale and Estes Park and some others. I think we could probably pull together an RFP and see where that goes. That is, and as I look at that, when I look at the cost estimate, and quite frankly, as I looked at the parking estimates, I was really hoping that there would be some room in the total funding after parking is achieved to supplement that along with a shuttle or a transit type pilot. And so one of the things as I looked at the numbers today is, and I realized that we had been pushing to try to get higher numbers on parking. but something for the committee to consider, that is if we pull together a transit shuttle type proposal, that perhaps you stay with the original 109 parking stalls, creation of 109, and free up some additional funding to help with the transit. I'm just throwing that out there as an idea that could be a combination of the two, may better suit the needs of the community and help meet the criteria of the funding. So,
Hey, Monty, this is Curtis
Yes.
Wells. What kind of in the game would you be requiring from the local governments for this project? How much money would that? What's the budget for that?
That haven't come to a number, to be perfectly frank. We have not said they have to participate at an X level. If they had the ability to, I think we could put our heads together and brainstorm in a subcommittee on things. One of the items that had been thrown out early, it was a potential for a large vehicle parking. That wouldn't work without a shuttle system. If there's city or public land that's available for that, perhaps that could go into the mix. That wouldn't be a cash outlay. It could be a soft cost type participation to provide a location for that type of a parking facility. That some of the operation costs. To answer your question succinctly, we did not decide on a number. We'd like to work with the community and the committee to try to come up with some good, innovative means to make this work.
Yeah, that's the only, I think this is a great development, and I know the committee's expressed support for, some form of transit in the past, but financially, neither the county, especially the city, are in a good, a great position right now. And so I think for the committee to be able, when we rank the projects and the final kind of priority list, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, I think the sooner we can understand what the financial requirements from the locals would be on a transit concept, the better. So that's a concern of mine. And it's like what Kalen said about the off-main parking is, with capital improvements, it's like, it's one thing to say, hey, well, we can just, pay for this down the road. But the reality is that we're pinching pennies right now, and that's putting it lightly. And so those concerns are real.
Understood. Like I said, I think there's an opportunity to sit down and kind of brainstorm through some options and so how to make this work. Given the current economic environment that we're in with COVID, I believe that we can certainly try to be creative and find ways to find a good solution.
So this is just looking down the road, but
are there any other updates? So go ahead.
Just looking down the road at the end of the pilot, is there, do you know offhand, ongoing funding available for local government transit, or does that typically then fall mostly on the local government to figure out how to make it pencil with their budget?
So this is where Jeff Sanders would be able to support me, and he's not currently online. But in fact, we do have a transit study is actually already planned. It's kind of the third level study, if you recall, way back earlier on in the process of the hotspot funding. We had Zachariah come in and talk about the Moab Valley planning effort, then the Moab and the Grand County Master Transportation Plan, and then that's followed up by a transit study. And so, yes, in a nutshell, there are transit funds available to help with the operation of transit systems. The transit and shuttle, as we talked about before, are separate. A transit is more to meet the needs of a commuter type facility and lower income and commuter type. A shuttle would be more like a shuttle to and from hotels to the downtown area. They can be operated under the same organization, but they have to be kept separate books. The accounting has to be kept separately because you cannot use the federal transit funds to supplement a shuttle. So that's a little bit of a complicated answer to your question, Kaylin, but yes, there are funds available to help with transit. I believe, there's lots of ways that the city could work with the community to think about funding. There's the quarter-cent sales tax. I believe the area has only implemented one of those out of the 5 quarter-cent sales tax that have been available. I'm just brainstorming out loud here of what some of the options could be.
So Monty, to that question, Kaylin, when I spoke with Jeff, he said that yes, and right now that the funding is pretty much allocated for the next 3 years. So if we were to go forward with this pilot program, in 3 years' time, we would be able to try to apply, and the funds, we would apply for 50% of operating costs. Currently, Park City is taking the majority of the funds, and it's supposed to be used for rural communities. So it seemed, if I may say that, Jeff said that he would fight to make sure that there's answers as to if we, why we wouldn't have get funding in 3 years' time, but that, if we were prepared, we would be able to do that. And I think there's, and Monty, if you want to speak to it, because I asked Jeff the same question there, it felt like as if everyone was like, oh, we got to do the RTP, and then we have to do the master transportation plan, and then we're going to do the transit study. And Jeff was saying that the RTP is not going to tell us anything that we don't already know. And there's only going to be a recommendation at the end of it, which is to say that they recommend transit, and that we don't have to go in a, chronological order in terms of how the studies are implemented. And because I think that has been sort of a, we need to do it in, lockstep with the RTP and then the master transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Absolutely. It doesn't have to wait. We don't have to wait on the other. It's just a matter of working with the planning group and with Tim Boschert and our transit group to get the study moving forward. Let's see. I'm just looking, actually, Jeff sent an email with me about his conversation. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else on there. City's interested in a shuttle program, probably a 3 to 5 page paper addressing how it would operate. And, that's something that, Jeff has some experience in. He can certainly help and participate in those activities. But you're right, Karen. We don't have to go lockstep. Our regional planning, master transportation plan, and then transit. The transit can happen anytime we get that moved forward. It's not dependent on the others. They should complement each other, but they aren't dependent.
Gotcha. Okay.
Any other questions, comments on transit?
So it seems like our staff has been putting in time on various proposals, and with round one, consultants spent quite a bit of time in their UDOT's money, the state's money, on developing proposals. And now it's like at the 11th hour, this possibility is opened up. And so is the 3 to 5 pager is kind of what we need to submit as part of our package. Am I understanding that correctly? Or is there, it seems like being really clear on what the proposal requirements would be helpful in terms of our figuring out our resources.
So if I can address that, I believe our next step, would be to engage in in developing the cost estimate. We have those, like I said, the rough costs that were provided to us by Fair Peers would be about $1.5 million per year. We can then also look and see what options or what potential exists for community involvement, city, county involvement in that, and how to have a match of some type, and then present that into a proposal for drafting an RFP that we could include that as our proposal to the Transportation Commission for moving forward. So there's some more details that would have to be investigated on costs to have a better handle on that. But I do believe that you know, we can ask Jeff. He's provided some information, say for instance from Estes Park and from Springdale, that we can, you know, make some phone calls and maybe working with Karen and Jeff, they can pull together some of that information and put together a good proposal.
And this is where I think the county really needs to come in and.
So for Carly, is looking at the agenda item. Carly, we're not going to have anything on this project for public engagement, then, are we?
For transit?
Curtis, I have about 5 pages, but it's
Right.
very widely spaced.
I mean, it depends on, it sounds like we won't have a kind of a near done proposal. We can do it kind of conceptually and present what we have so far for public engagement, which is this rough outline of it's going to be, you know, about 3 years. This is this kind of general scope of where it's going to go, when it's going to run. But it's up to you to decide if you're comfortable with that.
You have that information now?
What was that? I believe UDOT does have that information now.
And we have that information now, where it's going to go?
Not specific
All right.
stops, but a general.
Okay. So
Yeah.
We'll make that decision at the next agenda item.
Yeah, it can be a general, just for floating.
Okay.
Curtis, can you hear me?
Okay. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on transit before we move on to the public engagement decision process?
Yes.
Item?
Yes, Chairman Wells. Calling Chairman Wells. Can you hear me? Hey, Jaylyn, I'm just going to speak to you. It would be really great.
Yeah. Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. If we could get some county support on this, because this is not a specific city project. This is crossing boundary lines. And so if there's somebody in the county that would like to work on this, that would be very helpful.
I think that, I know you directed that at Jaylyn. Jaylyn, feel free to chime in. I mean, I think that we can pull in our planner, our new planning director, you know, and our economic development director. But I want to mention to you that when I had this conversation with you and Monty, you know, 2 to 3 weeks ago, about transit kind of making its way back in, you know, I did mention to Monty that, you know, the county's never really had great resources for this, especially because we, you know, our planning and zoning department has basically been inoperable for about 5 months now. And so we were really going to be leaning on UDOT, you know, for this concept. And so that's been the way that I've been proceeding. It's not that we don't want to help. It's just we haven't really had the configuration or resources to help. But I think the new planning director and economic development off the top of my head would be, you know, it would be reasonable to pull them in. And if there's anyone else that anyone can think of in the county, we of course would make that request to them.
So Monty, do you know how much help we can get?
Well, I don't want to commit Jeff Sanders full time to pulling together. I think it's going to require more of a resource. He could be a resource to help provide information and to reach out to some other communities and get numbers. Is there, as far as just writing it, is there somebody, a technical writer within the city or county that has that capacity somewhere in the groups, or is that something we would need to see about bringing in? We've been resistant to provide a lot of additional concept development money because we spent about $500,000 previously in our previous efforts between the vetting the various projects and the concept estimates, and then working through on the parking structure. And so that's the reason we've been pushing back a lot of the concept for our current funding effort onto the community, is because we've spent a considerable amount. Not to say that we can't participate in it, but we certainly would like to see if there's somebody within your community groups that could help with this. We can provide resources as far as the information and help gather that. Like I said, without Jeff here, I don't know to what degree I can check with him and get back with you on what he thinks the commitment would be to develop this proposal.
Okay, yeah. And then Carly, I would just meet with you.
If we could get a follow-up email after the meeting, to kind of outline what's needed and what's requested, that would be helpful, and then Jalen and I can kind of plug folks in. But if we could it would be really helpful if I could see in writing, like, what resources are needed to determine, to move this forward to an acceptable point. That would be great. And then we can work on that for sure.
Okay. So Karen, I think we ought to have a conference call with you and myself and Jeff, and let's put our heads together and see what we think our best next steps are, and then we can follow up with that type of outreach too and generate an email, if that works for you.
Where did Karen go? Did we lose her?
It looks like she's no longer present.
I bet that does work. I bet she will be happy to talk to you, Monty, you and Jeff.
Yeah.
So
Right.
because of the short time frame and the resources that will eventually be available for the transit planning, I'm still concerned that we have potentially more than $10 million in capital projects on the table under consideration. And while I want to have transit, if we're going to have the resources to do a good job of planning in the near future, I'm still trying to balance jump starting it with UDOT with hotspot money versus using the transit planning process that is queued up but not yet started, and then hopefully that can. And I guess my question is, will there be more money for a pilot project available via other means besides hotspot? Potentially.
I don't currently see that. I don't see any other money in addition to this money.
Yeah, I think
pilot.
that's okay.
And I hate to cut off, but I do have a hard stop right now to go meet with some of our shed folks. But Karen, I'll be reaching out. I'll get a hold of Jeff and then give you a phone call if you want to reply and let me know what your calendar looks like. I'm looks like I do have a window from 2 to 3 today, and that's about it, actually, other than after hours or during lunch or something like that for the next, all the way till Friday. But I'll grab Jeff and we'll try to get a hold of you.
Thanks, Monty.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Monty.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Monty. With that, let's move on to our final agenda item, which is item 7, discussion and approval of projects to be included in public engagement efforts. I honestly think this is just a simple motion that lists the projects to be included in the public engagement efforts. So I would entertain a motion there.
I move to include the downtown and dispersed parking projects, the Spanish Valley Path, and transit as the projects to be presented. Sorry, I'll leave it at that until discussion.
I second that.
Motion on the floor by Councilmember Jones.
I
Is there a
seconded
second?
it, Curtis.
Motion seconded by Commissioner Hawks. Discussion.
So I want to be supportive
Motion
of transit. I'm not
seconded. Discussion.
So I want to be supportive of transit. I also have no idea really what will be presented. I feel like a survey, I mean, I imagine a transit shuttle survey will involve some legwork via a public engagement process to figure out like how people would use this and if they would use it. And can we get hotels to participate in cost share if it's more of a shuttle than transit and so forth. So, but that's all I've got, just uncertainty.
Yeah, I think, Kaylin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's going to be like, do you support a transit system or a pilot transit system in town? That's going to be because we want to put the survey out by the end of the week, beginning of next week, and we probably won't have a whole proposal yet. So it'll be concept level and like level of support, level of value kind of questions in that survey. I hope that's okay.
Any other discussion?
You're muted, Karen.
Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion on the floor, would you say aye?
Curtis, I had a question about the downtown improvements.
Maybe, okay, go ahead.
Well, no,
Sorry, I don't think I'm being heard clearly. I really apologize for the lag.
That's okay. I mean, hunting's really important, Curtis, but the Main Street improvements, like, is that, since what was presented from Monty, I mean, do we want to have that in, it seems like it's not corresponding because we're not looking at taking Main Street parking off of Main Street. So should that even be included?
Let me offer my 2 bits worth, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think Main Street improvements is yeah, go ahead, Mike.
It depends on the goal of this public presentation. You only got a limited amount of time. Do we want to focus on what is most likely to be funded and the nuances thereof, which are just beginning to get across to the public? Or do you want to beat a dead horse and talk about a lot of things that we've talked about and discarded basically over the last few months? We could bring them up just in the interest of generality and let the public know, gee, what we've have talked about, but it just hasn't worked out under the tenets of the UDOT philosophy. Or don't bring them up because they're not going to go anywhere anyway, and focus on what we are going to spend money and what it would look like. I personally am inclined to go for the latter, where you guys are headed the other direction.
The motion is for just the ones that we're actively considering. I don't know that I'm hearing people arguing for the former.
It seems like the Main Street improvements is something that we really aren't considering because it's.
I'm certainly not. I'm in favor of the motion. That's all.
I think there's also a question of even if we have time to develop a concept for Main Street improvements. So even doing engagement for them, we would be done mid-October. Is that time to develop a concept and to recommend removing Main Street parking? It's pretty quick.
I'm disinclined to include Main Street improvements. That's.
I guess I don't understand. Apologize for the lagging. I don't understand what concept we would develop if there's not a single improvement to Main Street that mitigates congestion. I don't understand where the discussion's at there.
I think it would be under the economic development category, in that it makes it for a more attractive down pedestrian experience. And it provides a location for more bike parking. And unfortunately, it's not addressed by hotspot criteria, but it improves pedestrian safety and shortening the crossing distance on Main. But I think the likelihood of it going anywhere is low.
Well, and I mean,
at this time.
I think I was hearing from UDOT, they were saying, we don't recommend this. And they're
yeah.
This.
So how would I make a motion to not include the Main Street improvements at this time?
You would just go with.
Sorry, it wasn't included, Karen.
It
wasn't included in the motion.
It's not included. It's not included in the standing motion.
I thought I heard that it was included.
No. It's not
Then
on there.
Then I apologize. I heard Main Street improvements.
Yeah, I think one thing that's going on with the committee is there's downtown improvements and Main Street improvements. And it seems like every meeting this gets thrown up into the mix. So the Main Street was gone a long time ago in previous meetings. So yeah, I think if we stick to downtown from now on, it'll be a lot more clear.
Kaylin, is that what you meant? Is just the downtown, which is the side streets?
That is what I intended, but I may have misspoken given the confusing language that we have around it. But yeah, it was not my intention to include the Main Street improvements, whatever those are.
Okay.
Or aren't.
So Councilmember, can I ask you to just restate the motion real quick, and then let's get a nod from whoever seconded the motion, and then so that we're crystal clear.
I move to include the following projects in the next public engagement effort. Downtown improvements, including Emma Boulevard, the Spanish Valley Trail, and a transit/shuttle pilot project.
I second it.
All those in favor?
Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Oh my gosh.
It's secret, but it was unanimous.
Aye, man, that's a hell of a lag. All right, next steps. Do we want to schedule our next meeting now? If so, what are some dates that work? That give us enough time to advance our work, but doesn't cut us short, because we've realistically only got 2 to 3 meetings left maximum.
So I've been calendaring it out as we've been speaking. I want us to meet at least. I want you to be making a decision on your package that you send to both the councils and the commission, by like October 19th, the week of October 19th. So, and we probably need to meet, I think, 2 times in between then to hammer out transit and off Main Street parking. So I recommend we meet next week and the week of the 12th. We will also be holding public meetings in the next 3 weeks. And so I'll be reaching out to some of you to see if you are willing to help be present at those meetings. One will be virtual and one will be in person. That was what was requested last time we met. Is that still what the committee wants? Is it in-person and virtual meetings?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And we will need help staffing. I think, transit, it'd be great if Karen could take the lead, for example, on transit. I think Chuck and Nora could do off Main Street parking, shared use path, the county. It could be Mila, it could be Jalen, Evan, whomever. And if we could have someone sort of give a presentation of an overview of our process, that would be helpful. But anyway, I'll be sending out emails and seeing if we can staff them. And if it doesn't get staffed, we probably won't be able to hold the meeting. So please participate, because I know the community loves to have you there. But so I'm thinking either maybe next week for the virtual meeting, or maybe the week of the 5th, just to make sure that we have really good materials, and maybe the transit plan will be more fully formed, so we'll get better engagement with a more substantive transit concept. We're also working on a survey to put out by the end of this week, beginning of next week.
So can you tell us what is the deadline for
November.
transmission of the proposal to UDOT?
November 1st is what they've given us. And so I've reserved 2 weeks, the week of the 19th for approval work for you, this committee, and then the week of the 26th for approval by your respective governing bodies.
So the last regular county council meeting that I see is on the 20th. Is that, so us meeting sometime the week of the 19th doesn't really address that deadline unless they have another meeting I don't know about.
I think we had talked about doing a joint meeting. So it would be a special joint meeting. I'm envisioning the week of the 26th.
Okay. That makes sense.
Oh, yeah. And hopefully we will, and we might have to do a special meeting ourselves. The city might get kind of curious at the end of this to see how we pull it off. But so it's going to be a really action-packed month.
Right. Well, what I was leading into with that question was maybe this committee should maybe meet a little earlier to accommodate the council schedule and commission schedule rather than vice versa.
Yeah, I think that if we can, just because it's going to take about 3 weeks to do engagement. So, it's not going to be until the week of the 19th that you'll have that engagement done anyway. Are folks able to meet next week and then the week of the 12th?
I can meet next week, but I can't meet the week of the 12th, except very maybe the 13th, right before city council.
Okay, so it'd be like a 5 to 7 meeting or something.
Yeah, maybe.
I can also send out, this is gonna be hard and I don't wanna have to do it on camera. I can send out a doodle poll. How about we do that? A couple for those weeks. Okay. That works. I've got what I need, I think.
That would be great. Okay, are there any other discussions pertaining to next steps?
Curtis, who am I gonna talk to at the county?
Okay, hearing none, I'll adjourn the meeting at 12:17. Again, I apologize for the lag. Thank you all for being patient as we work through that.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
So I think what we discussed is if you and Monty or Monty could send Jalen and I an email of which resources were needed for assistance in the concept, Jalen and I could then identify, kind of talk to the administrator and identify staff to help out.
Okay,
But
thank
without
you.
knowing what specifically is needed, it's hard for us to direct to anyone. So let's just follow up on that. All right, thank you. Thank you all.